Ogwehoweh. Welcome to the OSTTC Ganohsa'å Longhouse. What we currently have in the Longhouse are some artifacts, and we also have some replicated items that might be seen and or utilized in the Longhouse. These are very old artifacts. They actually predate the Longhouse culture itself, not common knowledge here in Ontario. So we have these seed pods here from a shrub called the bladdernut. When these pods are hanging off the tree or the shrub, they make this rattling sound. So we use these seeds in our rattles. It's bladdernut is the common name, English name, and the Cayuga language we refer to it as stawendronta. And so that's indicating the rattling sound. So this is an example of a bark rattle made out of elm bark. Another type of rattle that we have in the community and in our culture, it's another bark rattle made with hickory bark. So, and we also have some examples of the quahog shell that were used to make wampum. In the Cayuga language, wampum is referred to as otuku'a. And this is an example of what that looks like here. The beads that were made from it were used in trade, and it's also used in our treaty belts. The Haudenosaunee and other eastern tribes were known for making beautiful belts for treaties and agreements and marking occasions and historical events. And so these are the beads that were used, and they had a very specific value. So we have things like projectile points. These artifacts that we have here were donated or dropped off. We tell people to leave artifacts where they find them. Take a picture. As soon as you move something, you lose context, or if you dig it up, you lose context and the archaeological layering and the rich archaeological history of the Grand River and Six Nations. The phenomenon with the light in here is when you start a fire, the smoke starts to rise from the heat of the fire, and as it approaches the roof, you have these shafts of light shining through the smoke holes, and it's a very interesting effect. So at certain times of the day, the shafts of light can reach down to the floor, but you can only see it with the smoke, with the fire going. This is a log cabin style fire, if you're into the survival book stuff. If I were to be using something like sticks, I would probably do it different. I'd probably just do like a regular conical teepee style fire setup. But what we have here mostly is just split wood. And I really like to burn this ash. Ash burns really well whether it's wet or dry. So this stuff is not too bad actually, it's pretty dry. Okay, you can just drop a green ash tree and split it and it'll burn without too many problems. When we lye corn here, so when you lye corn, you take the ashes and you mix them with the corn, and then you rinse the ashes out. You don't want too many ashes, you don't want to consume too much of it. When I read accounts of people using ashes, and it's still practiced today by people. They would just let some of the ashes stay in the corn and it would be cooked into the soup, and sometimes they would even add a pinch of ashes into the soup as a seasoning. It just gives it a smoky sort of a texture and flavor that it's hard to describe. But it tastes better. In recent times, people still use it instead of rock salt in the winter for ice and slippery patches. They would just spread ashes around on their walkways and driveways to help with the ice. Everybody had ashes, so it was used for a lot of things. You could rub it into your hair, if you had something like lice or something, you can just rub it in and use it that way as well. So it had a lot of uses. Still has a lot of uses. Charcoal itself is really useful too. Some people, when they've had food poisoning, you can actually just eat some charcoal and it'll absorb some of whatever you took into your stomach. As well as clay. They would actually eat clay and have that to clean out their system. Clay cleanse. You can buy it at the health food store sometimes.
Humans, they possess the traits of good and evil all the time. And that comes from our creation story. So the earth was nothing. There was just darkness and there was water. We have what we call the sky world. There was this very giant apple tree, and they call it the celestial tree. And its roots went so deep into the ground. This tree had been uprooted. And so this woman fell into this hole. As she fell down to Turtle Island, what we call today. Down here, she gave birth to a daughter, and they lived for quite some time. She gave birth to twins. So these two boys, one was the creator and one was who we call the evil twin. So the creator, he made the crystal clear waters, the bears, and he made the deer, whereas his brother was always trying to diminish his good things he created. We call it the Mother Earth, and that is because the mother of these two twins was buried into the earth. So when we were made as people, we were essentially made from the Mother Earth.
We do have things on display that you can actually interact with hands-on and look at. We have examples of various carved spoons and bowls that you can look at. We do have games were played traditionally and are still played to this day. So this is an example we have here of a working example that you can try and play is the double ball game. In the Kuga language, we call it Ogwehoweh. And this is played historically, and it was still played to this day by people in the community. Our recent past, our grandparents used to play this when they were kids, and they tell us about, you know, they didn't have much back then, and so they would just take two socks and tie them together, stuff them with whatever material they had, and go out and play this game with the sticks they found. And they would play all day, run around and stay healthy like that. So these are things we talk about. We also have an example of sort of a fishing net. We have a replicated Atlantic salmon here. And so what we do is we take these plants that are used for textiles and for fibers for making rope. Native species, a flowering plant called dogbane. They grow locally and they're grown on site here. And so these fibers were stripped and they were used and twisted and made into fishing lines and fishing nets and different types of textiles. Finer and stronger than fibers that were used by the early colonists in Eastern North America. Yeah, so this is, again, the dogbane plant. We harvest these in the fall after the frosts. What we're after is the actual fibers on the skin of the plant. So these fibers are peeled off. People have been doing this for thousands of years, and it was used here in Six Nations as a source of fiber right up until the early 1900s. So you see these nice long strips of fibers come off, and it's strong. Like you can't break it. It's a really strong stuff. And so this is a very common method used throughout the world to make rope, the double wrap. And so what you do is you're twisting the fibers in one direction and you're wrapping them back in the opposite direction. What it results in is a very strong cord that you can use catching or snaring animals or for making any sort of strap or belt. So this rope here looks just like a rope you would buy at a hardware store or whatever. It's the same method, very similar method.
In the Haudenosaunee culture, the elders are protected. They're the core of our communities. Your parents would be out farming, would be out hunting, and your grandparents are the ones who would actually really be raising you and teaching you the culture. When you're not old enough to work in the fields, or when you're not old enough to start learning how to hunt or to trap, you're sitting with your grandparents all the time, and you're learning and you're taking in everything that they know. You know the stories and the lessons that come with it. For the women, top priority. So when a woman carries life, we're raising warriors. Well, you also have to raise leaders as well. Our chiefs are a very big part of the Haudenosaunee culture, but in reality, chiefs are actually assistants.
We have the corn pounder and the corn mortar. So they grew corn and beans and squash, and so the corn pounder was very important for processing the corn. These are something that have been used for thousands of years by people in the eastern woodlands, including the Haudenosaunee of Six Nations. Right up until the mid-1900s, this is a common item used in the community and by our ancestors. Yeah, you sit here and you grind the corn until it's ground into a fine flour. And when you're making the flour, you have to have somebody who's an expert at what the flour is supposed to look like and what the product is supposed to look like. And so they're looking over your shoulder, feeling the flour and they're looking at it. That was oftentimes the job of the young people and the kids. It was also used for mashing foods and for grinding tree nuts like acorns and chestnuts into flour as well and processing those.